U.S. debt deal's provisions to include energy permitting will help speed up fossil fuel and clean energy projects. But the agreement fails to address the need for additional transmission lines and pipelines to transport that energy. In tonight's special report Spotlight Energy Matters, my colleague Bret Baier looks at the long, costly process to add generators to our nation's power grid and why those updates may soon be necessary.
Thanks, Shannon. Most of today's power grid was built in the 1960s and 70s. An estimated 70% of transmission lines are more than 25 years old. Now, lawmakers and utility groups are debating how best to update the infrastructure. The clock is ticking, though, with grid vulnerabilities already evident and another hot summer in the forecast.
We take it for granted in this country compared to the rest of the world that the lights come on every time you flip the switch, and it's pretty good, but we're seeing signs that it's starting to fray.
The North American Electric Reliability Corporation is warning of widespread blackouts this summer. 2/3 of the country have an elevated risk for potential for insufficient operations. It paints not a great picture.
No, it's really concerning because electricity is pretty critical to how we operate every minute of every day. And you got to be able to have the lights come on when you're counting on it. That's an expectation we have across this country. Unfortunately, certain policies are driving us in the wrong direction.
The reliability report lists recent efforts by the Biden administration to limit emissions at power plants as a grid vulnerability. National Rural Electric Cooperative Association CEO Jim Matheson warns that policy is adding to a supply and demand problem in the U.S. How do we solve that problem?
First step is the old saying, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And we got to take the shovel away from the EPA. They're making decisions that are forcing the closure of power plants, and yet we're not replacing that generating capacity with additional plants. It's really hard to build something in this country these days. So we're at a point where we're reducing supply, and public policy in terms of the permitting world doesn't allow us to build new resources.
The former Utah Democratic representative believes additional funding is needed for grid improvements. Was there any electrical grid improvements in the infrastructure bill?
Well, there's a lot of money for some resilience, and resilience is where you're hardening the grid to allow it to survive more extreme weather events.
The Biden administration says billions from the infrastructure law would be dedicated updating the grid and upgrading transmission lines with an emphasis on clean energy. But industry leaders say some regulations are making it difficult to get those projects up and running. So what does the building behind me have to do to help get to that?
Well, the first thing they could do, and I hear a lot of conversation on Capitol Hill these days, is we need to reform our environmental permitting process in this country. And my gosh, Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act decades ago. They haven't ever reformed it. It's a mess today. It takes forever to permit a project.
Recent negotiations to raise the debt limit have included permitting reforms for some energy projects, but some Republicans believe more needs to be done.
I'm excited that we may get some pipeline permitting reform in the debt ceiling negotiations. We're at a point of criticality in this nation, and that we have the resources to produce. The producers just have nowhere to put it. And we have states like mine in South Carolina that needs more capacity in order to meet our electrical needs.
Republican South Carolina Representative Jeff Duncan chairs the Energy, Climate, and Grid Security Subcommittee. He says even getting clean energy producers on the electric grid is proving difficult.
These are renewable energy projects that are facing the same hurdles for regulation. This permitting process, it's very costly, so that's where the irony is.
The process, called the interconnection queue, has created years-long wait times for wind and solar generators. Once approved, many producers also face higher costs than anticipated, or their projects fail completely. What's that mean for increasing the renewable energy output when you're talking about the grid?
Every financial impact on the utility goes straight to the consumer's electric bill. Not only are we concerned about reliability, as we've been talking about, we're concerned about affordability as well.
Lawmakers from both parties agree addressing the risks are crucial for this summer and well into the future. Are we facing more brownouts, blackouts this summer?
I don't want to sound like an alarmist that everything's going to happen all at once, but the trend continues to move in a direction of greater risk of outages every year.
Later this year, the Energy Department is expected to publish a long-term national transmission planning study, which includes potential solutions for a transition to clean energy. As the energy landscape continues to change, we'll follow the latest efforts to modernize the grid.